One question.
Okay. Okay, we're in Columbus, Ohio on August the 30th, 1997, and we're here with John Miner of the 495th Headquarters Battalion.
Right.
And if you can just start by telling us a little bit about growing up, what it was like, where you were, a little bit about your parents.
Okay. Well, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I was born in 1922 and lived all my life in Brooklyn until I was drafted into the Army in 1942. I lived through the Depression years, and during that time my father had trouble finding jobs and finally was able to get one as a taxi cab driver. But we were able to get along because my mother did have a job as a telephone operator. I went to New York City I had two brothers. I was the oldest. The next youngest was my brother Raymond, who volunteered for the Marines and eventually retired from them. My other brother was Jim, and he served 3 years in Japan after World War II. Eventually went on to become a Lutheran minister. So I did go to public schools in New York City and ended up at Manual Training High School, which is where I got my diploma, where I got it from. And from there, I went to work for what was then the Chase National Bank as a messenger boy at $12 a week plus lunches. In that position as a messenger boy, I got to see quite a bit of downtown Manhattan because of taking documents and such to lawyers' office.
Okay, you were telling us about
my job after 6 months or so at downtown. I did get transferred to the Radio City Music Hall branch, and it was kind of fun to be in the area where all of the theaters and actors and actresses were roaming around. And I would bring documents again to the Waldorf Astoria and to former President Hoover, for one thing. I also got to see the John Powers Muddled Girls when I brought messages there. So I stayed there until for about another year. And then I got a scholarship to a small Swedish Lutheran college in New Jersey called Uppsala, which is no longer in business. When I finished my first year there, I was drafted and went into the Army in October 1942. And I was in the Army for 3 years, 2 weeks, and 8 days.
Where did you enlist and what were the events during?
I had tried to enlist in the Navy Air Corps, but I was rejected for physical reasons. So I decided just to wait until my number came up in the draft, and when it came up, I went to my local draft board and got my number, and eventually got the greetings from the president, and went on October 15th. I went to Penn Station and with a couple of hundred other men got on a train and went out to Long Island to a camp there. His name I can't remember at the moment. It was my first day in the Army, and we went through all the routines, walking here, there, and everywhere, getting clothing and equipment and so on. By the time we finished that, it was about 11 p.m., and that was at the time that they gave us the intelligence test and the radio test. And then we shifted off to our barracks, and sure enough, I got called for KP, so I had to get up about 5 in the morning and went to the mess hall and just sliced grapefruits for about an hour, And then they grabbed me and put me on a train and sent me down into Kentucky to, I was then Camp Campbell. And I do remember getting off the train, going into a big gymnasium and going through a few other physical kinds of tests. And then I was told I was going to be with the headquarters battery, the 495th Artillery. And when I found out we were part of a 12th of an armored division, I was young and naive, and I thought, gee, that'll be great. You know, I'll really like that. And so anyway, I arrived at headquarters battery there and got put in a barracks, and only about 3 or 4 other men there at that time. In the next day or two, it filled up completely. And they taught me how to make a bed, how to salute, and welcomed me.
What were the barracks like in the camp there at Camp Campbell?
The barracks here were 2-level barracks. I don't know how long they were, but I suspect they put about 30 or 40 beds, cots across. And I happened to get upstairs for some reason. And it was pretty crowded at that time. Eventually it got thinned out. But barracks, were just barracks.
What were you involved in as far as the Tennessee maneuvers?
Tennessee maneuvers? Yeah, at that time I was in the liaison half-track as a radio operator. And so, we just went through the maneuvers like everybody else did. But one of the nice things for me being a radio operator was in the evening, at night, I could lay down in the half-track, put on my earphones, and listen to broadcasts from all over the world. I happen to enjoy classical music, and I always was able to pick up some orchestra somewhere that was playing something that I recognized. So that was pretty cushy. The other 2 things I kind of remember is living out of your helmet. You used it to hold the water so you could wash and shave. And the other thing was that when we were not maneuvering and were in an off time, we had some big buckets that we'd heat over a wood fire, and you just shave off brown soap and throw your clothes in, let them boil, take them out, and let them dry out. Yeah, it wasn't too much maneuvers.
Do you remember if you were on the blue or red squad?
I think we were in the red, but I'm not sure.
That's right, the whole 12th Armored Division was one.
Yes,
right.
We were maneuvering against someone else. I don't remember who.
Okay.
Yeah.
And let's see, soon after that, went down to Camp Barkley.
Yes.
So did you, what about the train trip down, and what were your first thoughts of Abilene?
I don't remember too much of the train trip down, so there must not have been anything extraordinary about it. But what I do remember is getting off the train right out in the middle of nowhere, and looking to the horizon and seeing nothing except what looked like flat space. And the sun was just coming up, so it was a really pretty sunrise. It was a little bit overwhelming to see all that land. When you grow up in a place like Brooklyn, all you see are other houses. So that was impressive. I guess the other thing is that growing up in Brooklyn, New York in those years, when I got down to Camp Campbell, I thought I was really in the deep South. And I'd never gone anywhere except New Jersey at that time in my life. So it was an eye-opener to see another part of the country. and to meet people who came from farms and small towns. We had such different ideas about the world.
What did you think about the people in Abilene?
Oh, they were nice to me. They were very nice. Our battalion was going to have an evening of song and dance, put on a show, I guess is what it is. And, the private who was heading it up was a fellow by the name of Paul Katz, also from New York City. But somehow he talked the proprietor of a dance school to use her students in the play. So for the first time, we had some ladies present. Of course, they were really very young girls, about 13 or 14, but they were cute, and it went well.
Who are your buddies you started kind of falling in with at this time?
Oh, yes. Well, I had, two who were my best buddies. One was a man by the name of Dick Garrett, and the other one was Dick Hegemeyer. And Hegemeyer was from Queens, New York, and Garrett was from San Francisco. Somehow we just drifted together, and well, it was partly we were in the same section for a while. I should interject that at the end of maneuvers, we found out that headquarters battery was going to have 3 tanks for forward observers, and so I volunteered to be in one of those tanks, and I ended up as the gunner for that tank. So when we got down to Camp Barclay, that's where we picked up our tanks. But those people were my closest buddies, partly because we were together in the maneuvers in the same half-track. And also, prior to that, at Camp Campbell, somehow we just drift together. There were lots of other nice men, but those were the closest.
What went on at Camp Barclay?
It cured me of camping. We were out in the field almost all the time, it seemed to me, except for weekends. Sleeping out mostly in a bedroll, not having all the amenities, eating out of mess kits all the time. It's kind of a joke in my family. Everyone wants to go camping, but not me. I was camped out. At Barclay, we did mostly maneuvering in the field. And I did get some training as a forward observer in case of necessity. And that was fun. Because we made, towards the end, we were to go on a maneuver that I think was supposed to determine whether we were fit for going overseas. And we went down towards Brownsville, as I remember, and then got called back because apparently we didn't leave the barracks in good shape. On the road back, it was so dusty, you could not see, you could barely see a vehicle in front of you. And you had to wear a mouth guard, I forget what it's called, and goggles. And you take your goggles off, and there's a white skin there, and the rest is all dust. It was really pretty bad. And then at the end of our time in Barclay, one of my other friends and I talked about going to the paratroops, and there was a poster on our billboard saying, you can volunteer for the paratroops. So we went to the first sergeant, and he said, no, you can't volunteer. So we walked out and said, well, yes, we can. We went down to the office of the Inspector General at division headquarters. He's a man you can talk to about any problems you might have with the service. but very few people did. So anyhow, he was a lieutenant colonel. He took us into a small room and asked us what was this all about. And so we told them we wanted to volunteer, but they wouldn't let us. And he said, well, I can tell you the reason they won't let you go now is because the division is going overseas in a couple of weeks, and they don't want to lose people out of the division. So, being young and naive, we said, oh, that's great. We just wanted to get overseas. And we did.
Well, okay. What did y'all do with your free time while you were at Camp Barclay?
Mostly went into Abilene. Went to some movies there. You could always get steak at a couple of the restaurants. And of course, they looked great to us. And I don't remember what we paid for it. I'm sure it was probably about $1, $1.25 for a very large steak. I never learned how to dance, so I didn't go to any of the dances that they had in Abilene. But I know people who did, and had a really nice time. But everyone was friendly when you walked along the streets or stopped and chatted. And you could go into Woolworths and look around. I was not a very exciting person then.
Okay. When you, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to ask if did anyone ever come and visit you or
Oh,
like that?
yeah. No, it was just too far from New York City down to there. No, but I had a girlfriend at that time, and she would write me letters, and I would write her letters. So that.
When you guys moved out, can you kind of tell me about anything you remember about the train ride up to Shanks and before y'all went on the...
Yes, before I do that, I'll tell you about another train ride. We went from Abilene to El Paso on a train that looked like it came out of the 1890s with the velvet seats and the fancy shades that pulled down. And that was also a little bit awe-inspiring for a New York City person to see all the oil wells as we went through some oil fields there. And then when we got to El Paso, we went out to the camp there. I forget what the name of it is, for anti-aircraft training. And so we spent a couple of days firing rounds at a target that was towed. But that was a little different of a train ride. Going from Camp Barclay up to, I want to say Camp Shanks, but that's not it. Anyway, to our point of embarkation. We did get sleeping cars, so except that there were two of us in the lower berth and one in the upper. And fortunately, I got the upper berth. I don't know how that happened, but I did. And we sat and talked and played cards. I think it was about a 3-day trip going up. And I remember, however we went, to get down to where we were going, we went from upper New York State and then along the Hudson River down to where we got off the train. And that was a very nice sight to see along the river and the mountains and the trees. And while we were at the camp, whose name I don't remember, we got a pass, and I was able to go home for about 6 hours. And then when we got back, we started packing up to go overseas.
And do you remember which boat you were on?
Yes, I was on the Tasker H. Bliss, which happily was built as a transport ship for personnel. And as we were getting on the ship, the Red Cross was there, and they gave us donuts and coffee, and we got down. We were all, my group was always at the bottom of the ship, so we had to go down, I don't know, 4 or 5 stairs, and then they tossed you and your duffel bag up into a bunk, and I got the top bunk again, and I know the ceiling was that close. Didn't have much room to turn around. But it was not a bad, the ocean was very calm, and the weather was fine. And when we got out of the harbor, we were able to go on deck, and and so we sat and watched the sea, and watched dolphins jumping, and read the pocketbooks. They were the first versions of the pocketbook that I'd ever seen. And we would sit on deck, talk, read, wait for chow, and then finally we got to, I think it was Bristol, England.
What kind of pocketbook?
The paperback pocketbooks.
Which, like Army?
No, they would be fiction.
Oh.
Yeah. I've always liked to read, so I probably read about 6 or 7 on the trip over, which was 10 or 11 days. But I was fortunate when I came back, the ocean was also calm. So I had a nice, easy voyage.
So you all landed in Bristol?
Yeah, we landed there and went and got on trains and went down to some airfield, just settled in, and it was raining and muddy and otherwise unpleasant. And we just about got settled in when we got orders to get up and get going. Went on another train and then went down towards Salisbury. And there we got off and into trucks, and then they took us to what was called Windmill Hill. And that's where we stayed for about a month before we went into France. We lived in 8 men in a tent. And the big thing was when you went to chow, you had to finish everything on your plate, otherwise you are punished. So as not to waste food. So in other words, don't take more than you can eat, kind of thing.
Did you ever get to go into London?
Yes, yeah, that was a highlight. In going to London, we had a ride down to Salisbury to get the train. And so, of course, we passed Stonehenge. And I could see it from the trucks, and I knew what it was, but I never did get close enough to it to really examine it. And we had a 2 or 3 day pass to London, I don't recall right now. But that, of course, was really terribly interesting. Stand in Piccadilly Square and see things that look familiar because you've seen them in movies or newsreels or magazines. And so that was really fascinating. And we stayed in a place in Marble Arch, a section of London, which was very nice. And so we wandered around London, ate in the restaurants, and you didn't get, the choice of food was not that abundant, but it was okay. It was better than, or more fun anyway, than eating out of your mess kit. And, eventually we boarded ships to go to France.
What kind of transport did you ride over?
I went over on some kind of a Dutch ship. I think of it as something like a tugboat, but it was bigger than that. And I know we slept on a table, and that there were a lot of cockroaches around. I don't know why, but they were. And then we landed in Le Havre and got on trucks and were driven through it to fields outside of AFA. And we slept in, the driver of our tank and myself pitched a pup tent together, and we slept in those for however long we were there, which was like a couple of weeks, I think.
What was the weather like?
Rainy and kind of cold. This was October there. And that's where you first really started to get used to walking around in mud. It was just a big field, and people were tromping around in it, and it was raining pretty hard and pretty often. And so you were always muddy in your boots. And then the same thing happened when we went into combat and end up in these small towns, villages even, and the roads might not be paved, and the rains would really make it pretty muddy, and of course all the vehicles on it didn't help any either.
So when you started getting into combat, what exactly was your position? I know you're in headquarters battalion.
Yeah.
What did that detail, and what did you encounter?
A forward observer is the person who goes with the infantry or tanks to call back for artillery support. He selects the target and then radios back to the firing batteries or to fire direction center, who'll give orders to the firing batteries, and then they fire. Well, my job was to be the gunner in the tank that was the forward observer's tank. And my big claim to fame is that I destroyed 2 German tanks and didn't get destroyed myself, which is another great accomplishment. I forget your question now. Oh, what I did, yeah. Well, that's what I did.
Great. Where did you first experience combat?
That was at Herlisheim, as I recall. I'm sure you've heard about Herlisheim from others. And that was where we had our most thrilling experience. We were accompanying about 8 or 9 tanks from a tank company in a field that had woods going parallel to our track on the right, and then perpendicular to us, across the front. And being the artillery tank, it was kind of a V formation that the tanks were in, and being the artillery observer tank, we were in the middle of this. And suddenly, as we got close to those wood line, the German 88 opened up, perfectly camouflaged. We didn't see it. And in less time than it takes, all but one other tank were destroyed. And some of them, the crew got out, and others they did not. In fact, the tank in front of us was the tank commander's tank, and I could see through my periscope what would be happening, and I saw him just flop forward over the hull of the tank. So I knew he'd been killed, shot. And then the tank went up in flames. But we backed out of there in a hurry and came through that all right. But that was the most exciting thing. There was one time much later on where a tank round hit our turret, but it hit it at an angle that put a crease about 2 inches deep and about 8 inches long as it kind of went like that. But when it hit, it sounded like somebody took a sledgehammer and took a whack out of the tank. But that was it towards the very end.
Did y'all have a 66?
Beg your pardon?
Did y'all have a 66?
No, you mean the gun? 75 millimeter on the tank.
Was that special for the headquarters
No.
battalion, or did they?
No, all the Shermans came with 75 until a little bit later on, and they did have some with a 76. Yeah. Yeah.
So, any other experiences during the battles around Earlshire?
Well, just maybe one. The sergeant in our crew acted as the loader for our 75. So I'm on this side of the breech of the gun, and he's on that side of it. So he can pick up the shells, shove them in, and I aim and fire. So we were going into a town we had just taken, but everything had quieted down, and we're just really going in to find a place to sleep. And Lieutenant Croker, who was our tank commander and was the artillery observer, got out to go look for headquarters and find out where they wanted us to be for the night. So the sergeant, whose name was Pulley, P-U-L-L-E-Y, sat on the top of the turret with his feet dangling through the hatch that's there. So when Croker left, I stood in the turret, and the parts of the turret that close up the hatches, that's the word. The hatches were open, one this side, one that side, and they covered me about like here. So anyhow, I was standing on the floor, not a good target, but all of a sudden, Pulley looked at me and he said, "They got me," just like in the movies. And he died immediately. Shot him right in the heart. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw the flash of the sniper's rifle. Then I tried to get a stop so I could do something about it. But our intercom went out. It seemed to go out at the wrong time. And it was a couple of minutes before I could get the tank stopped. And by then we passed it enough, but I told them what I saw, and a couple of them ran back and rounded up some other guys. They never did find the sniper. But I stayed with the tank because I thought maybe something could be done for Pulley, because we called for an aid man. They came in and they took a quick look and said, "He's gone." So that's the other event.
And after Earlshire, where did you guys continue?
Well, in the broadest sense, one of the first things we did, I guess, was to go north to take over the right flank of Patton's army, the 3rd Army, because he was pulling the 4th Armored Division out, and we were taking their place, and the 4th Armored was going up to Bastogne to relieve that besieged group. So we stayed with him for maybe a week, and then we then shifted down and went down to Colmar, right in the real corner of France and Switzerland, I think it is, Germany. And we helped in the liberation of Colmar. And then around the 17th of March, we headed back up north and to cross the Rhine. And we got across the Rhine in good shape and had some scraps along the way, but that's when we were really chasing the Germans all over the place. I was struck. We went through Bavaria, which is a lot of forest there, and I was struck by how clean the forests were. There were no limbs or anything laying around in the ground. And I finally realized much later that probably people took it for firewood. Because in these villages, they just had coal or wood stoves.
Do you have any encounters with French civilians? What were the French civilians like?
Well, I thought they were somewhat reserved with us, but we were in Alsace-Lorraine, and that's been transferred back and forth between Germany and France for many years. So the thing is, you would go into a house there, and there would be a picture of the son or father in a German uniform. And these people spoke French, but they also spoke German. And, there were no Nazis, of course, these, according to them. A friend and I started having lunch because we were in this one town for about 2 weeks. And this French woman who was a teacher, and we were in our, 22, 23 at that time. She was probably 40, so we knew she was an old person. We would bring our mess kits up and sit with her and talk. I had high school French, and I remembered quite a bit of it, and that's how I could get by, but I was not fluent, but I could get by. So we would chat with her, and bring her some food, chocolate, whatever. And it was just kind of fun to talk with. But she's the only civilian that I really had any contact with, other than say hello.
What about the German civilians?
When I saw them, they were very polite, almost fawning, and fearful until the war was over. I do have two distinct memories. We were sitting in the field out ready to take this little town, and there are tanks all around us. And all of a sudden, a large group started walking towards us from the distance, and somebody started shooting at them. And I said, "They're civilians, cease fire." And they were. It was the women and older men and children who were trying to surrender. And then we went right through the village, and there were some people standing outside their homes and lifting their arms up to, surrender, and you could see they were frightened. We tried to wave at them, and we're not going to hurt you. But those were mostly the kind of contact we had with civilians. It was not a very pleasant thing for anybody.
Did you have any detailed experience in Colmar?
No. Sat in the city of Colmar for quite a while, and then went south out of it into the woods. But we were chasing Germans, and they weren't in sight when we were there anyway. There is one other thing I would sort of like to tell. We were sitting again out in the field just short of a town, and all of a sudden Lieutenant Croker, my tank commander, called my attention to a haystack about 600 yards away. And he said, "There's a tank in there." And I said, "There, did you see that?" And the tank fired at us, and the muzzle blast caused hay to flare up, so you kind of knew what was going on. But he missed us, and so I got on him right away, and we got him. Yeah. Destroyed it, went up, smoke. But he had 3 shots at us. One that Croker first saw, the one that I saw, and then there was one other one before we fired. So either they had poor training or bad eyesight. Whatever it was, I was grateful.
And you said you shot another tank.
Yes, that was in Herlisheim. We got into the town. We were going down one street, and paralleling this on the next street were a couple of German tanks, and one of them stopped and his rear end stuck out to this cross street. So we just swiveled the turret around and got it. So that was the first one.
Okay. So after Colmar, you guys were chasing the Germans?
Yeah. We chased them into Austria. On the 3rd of May, we lost about 5, and we were pulled out of the line on the 4th of May, so this was the day before the last day. And 5 or 6 of our men went in a half-track to an infantry position to see about negotiating the surrender of a large German group. And whoever it was wouldn't surrender. Anyway, they got shelled, is what happened. And except for one man, they were all killed. And this is on the day before you would have been pulled out and been safe. So that was kind of sad.
We talked about your buddies that you got to know at camp.
Yeah.
Did they make it through the war?
Yes, they did. And in our tank, there was the one death. Our driver got shelled when he was outside the tank. And Lieutenant Croker got a nick, too. So 3 out of 5 were injured in some way. But fortunately, not too seriously.
And then on the last day of the war, what was the atmosphere? How did you feel?
Relieved was the most evident feeling. Just glad to know that it was over and I was safe and had all my arms and legs. It wasn't exhilarating, but it was gratifying to know that it was over. I don't know how men who put in much more time in combat than we did, I don't know how they managed to get through it. Because, day after day, you get up in the morning and you wonder, is this going to be my day kind of thing. So we were only in combat from December through the 4th of May, and it was pretty grim.
Did you have any experience with the death camps, the liberation?
One slight contact. We were rolling down the road, as we usually were, not fast, but slow. And out of the woods came scarecrow-looking people wearing what we called in those years prisoners' uniforms, stripes. If you ever saw any of Jimmy Cagney's old movies where he was in jail, you'd know what that looks like. And I looked at them, and they, I thought, these must be prisoners getting away. But they were also thin. We just went past them, kept going. And it wasn't until much later that I realized, these were concentration camp inmates. That was as close as I came to any contact with them.
So, after the war's over, did you have enough points to go home, or did you have to hang around?
Well, I got home early because I came down with kidney disease, nephritis, right after the war ended. By the end of May, I got a 3-day pass into Paris and enjoyed that. When I came back, all of a sudden I was short of breath and had trouble climbing stairs. Went to the medics. They shipped me back to a field hospital, and then they shipped me to a big hospital in Nancy in France. And they diagnosed me with the nephritis. And one morning when the doctors were coming through, looking at your charts and so on, one of them said to the other doctors, that we get a surprising amount of nephritis cases out of people who've been in the tanks. And I don't know. The only thing I can think of is that you sometimes would lay on the floor of the tank to sleep, and it would be pretty cold. So maybe cold in my kidney. Anyway, I never knew.
Didn't have anything to do with holding it or anything?
No, not that I know.
I just thought maybe in the tank you wouldn't be able to
Oh.
use the restroom.
Oh, yeah. No. Oh, that never was a problem. You'd just jump out and go behind. But because of the nephritis, then they put me on a hospital ship and shipped me home. And that was, as I said earlier, a very smooth ride. It was good for me because I could be up and around. Not a lot. They wanted you to be in bed rest mostly. But I was there with a lot of men who had been really hurt, lost legs, arms, and such. But then we landed in Staten Island, New York, and was there for a couple of days, and my folks were able to visit with me, and then they sent me up to Fort Devens, Massachusetts, to a hospital there. And I stayed there until I was discharged in December.
And after you were discharged from the Army, what did you do?
I went to college on the GI Bill. I went to Brooklyn College. And, you know, you were able to graduate in 3 years because they let you go through the summer months, whatever, anyway. And then I went to Columbia University School of Social Work. I became a social worker. And that was a 2-year master's that you worked on. But again, we were able to complete it in a year and a half because of letting you go through the summer quarters. And after that, I got a job.
And where did you work?
The first job I had was with an agency in New York called the Community Service Society. And they had offices in all of the boroughs of New York. And I was in the one in Manhattan. And I stayed there for about 7 years. Then I went out to Long Island to a small family agency there. And from there I went to Cleveland for 2 years to head an office there. And from there I went to Chicago to work with the United Way there. And I did that for 3 years. And then I joined, although I'm a good Lutheran, if there are any good Lutherans, I went to work for a Jewish family agency because I knew the director of it. And I liked it better than working at the United Way. And then from there I went to Cincinnati, where we've lived since 1974, to head the family agency in Cincinnati. So I claim to be a missionary working my way back east.
And what was your family?
Well, I married my wife Elsie in 1948. I have to stop and think if that's right. Yeah, because next year is our 50th. Yeah. She went to the same church I went to, and that's how we met, actually through a friend at the church. But anyhow, and then we had 2 sets of twins. First was in 1953, I think. I can't remember now. But they were fraternal. There were 2 girls, Michelle and Carol. And then 3 years later, another set of twins, John and Linda, arrived. And, so that's our big claim to fame, parents of 2 sets of twins.
All right.
Yeah.
Did you want to did you have any questions? Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, that's fine.